Chapter 2. Understanding Tracking. It is difficult to explain in a book how to learn visual tracking, as it is a skill that requires a lot of outdoor work with a simple explanation of what you are looking at. I remember someone giving me a piece of advice when I started writing, and I think this applies equally to visual tracking. That is, write as if you were talking to a blind man. Explain to him everything you see, hear, smell, and the environmental surrounding of the subject matter. Do not just say there is a woman sitting on a park bench. What time of year is it? What is the weather doing? What clothes is she wearing? Is she just sitting there? What look is on her face? Anticipation, happiness, distress? Visual tracking sign, footprint, are important because this is where man makes contact with the earth. In order to understand visual tracking from a book, you need to adapt the same outlook as talking to the blind man. Fully understand what it is you're seeing, hearing, or smelling, as well as what you are feeling. So place yourself in an outdoor scene and survey the countryside. Then look down and see what is a few feet away from you. If you're on a tarmac road, then you will not see many tracks, but if you're on a dirt track, you might see tire tracks or even a footprint. All you have to do now is interpret what you see into usable intelligence. Tire tracks mean a vehicle has gone this way, while the footprint will indicate a human. Simple, but you have to push this a little. The best example I can offer is one of returning home only to find the door you had previously locked slightly open. You would immediately look at the door for signs of forced entry. If there is none, who else has a key to your home may enter your mind. Pushing the door open, you see everything as it should be. There is music playing. Even so, you are cautious. Why? Because you have seen signs and it could be a burglary still in progress. Relief as you discover your significant other home early from work. In fact, you had just accomplished some visual tracking skills. You spotted the signs and evaluated them to what could be the cause. This is the approach you need to adopt with visual tracking. Interpret what you see. Nevertheless, before we can start, we need to know what signs there are out there, what triggers will help us understand what we are seeing, and finally, how to interpret them. Visual tracking sign. While tracking starts with a simple sign of our quarry, which we are able to track due to the prominence of the sign, in reality is a precise art which requires many years of skillful practice to achieve. In a military situation, visual tracking is fraught with additional dangers as the enemy may wait in ambush, lay mines, or prepare booby traps. Despite this, recent history has shown that with the right skills, experience, and a large amount of fortitude, a quarry can be tracked, providing the tracker has the following attributes: good knowledge of the local terrain, steady and patient, the ability to move slowly and quietly, detect and interpret all signs, avoid ambush and booby traps, understand the weather both before and during any tracking, know when the track is lost, keen sense of sight and smell, know the quarry and its habits and behaviors, the ability to listen to their own inner voice and heed any warning. The last item in the list is possibly the most important. Man has the ability within him to feel through the use of senses long since forgotten. Our ancestors had these senses which, when mixed with a basic knowledge of the terrain, animal habitat, etc., allowed them to become successful hunters. A good tracker must learn to rely heavily on these old senses and, while not understanding them, at least listen for them. When tracking a quarry, you should build a picture of it in your mind. What am I following? How are they moving? Do they know I am following? This picture will develop as you progress along the track, colored in by the signs left behind. A simple paw or footprint in the dirt will provide so much information. First and foremost, it provides confirmation, identifies the quarry, indicates direction, and provides an experienced tracker with a rough time when it was made. To understand any form of tracking, you first need to understand all the essentials that make tracking an art. If you understand these, then you're halfway to becoming a good tracker. Study all the items in the list and become familiar with each, because as a whole, these are the items that make up the tracking picture, which you will eventually follow. Human visual field. As most tracking is done by using the eyes, it is good to have an understanding of how we see as humans, as this is vital to spotting and reading the signs. When light reflected off an object enters the eye through the pupil, it is flipped upside down by a clear lens behind the iris. The light is then projected onto the retina, the part of the eye where vision is generated. The retina contains a lot of vision cells of two main types, cones and rods. Cone photoreceptors are most important to color vision. The cones distinguish color based on the light's wavelength. For example, as covered earlier in this book, a long wavelength is red and a short wavelength is violet. The photoreceptors then convert the wavelengths into electrical signals that are sent to the brain via the nervous system, creating color sight as we know it. Human eye detecting small detail is what visual tracking is all about. The bayonet is from an AK-47, most common weapon of terrorism, stabbed in the ground with its scabbard placed nearby. This is the kind of detail you need to see. When tracking, you need to understand what is happening with your eyesight and, where possible, work with a smooth head-turning motion. When you look straight ahead, the middle of your eyes do not register the same as the sides of your eyes, as the sides are more sensitive to light, brightness, and any flickering movement. How often have you said, "I saw it out of the corner of my eye"? The next time you're in the cinema, try this. Look up to the ceiling while the movie is playing, especially during bright scenes, and you will clearly notice that the movie flickers because you are seeing how many FPS the film is running at. If you are placed in a blacked out room for 2 hours or more and suddenly there is a very bright torch switched on, would you see it? Yes. However, what if the torch was only switched on for 1/200th of a second? The answer is still yes, as the contrast will be registered on the brain. Tests carried out by the U.S. military similar to the above showed that a pilot could recognize and identify an aircraft type flashed on picture for just 1/220th of a second. Another thing about your eyes is color. We see green best, which is why at dusk all the greenery and vegetation looks so beautiful and bright, with all the green color enhanced. This is because we see green clearer than, say, blue or red. So how does this help the tracker? First, look directly at the scene in front of you, using the center of the eye. Move your head slowly from one direction to another. Look through the vegetation, not at it. If you detect something and are not sure, move your eye to a closer spot for a second, then look back again and let your eye refocus. Author's note: while not connected to tracking, it is worthwhile pointing at a similar tip. If you're shooting at any range, just before you pull the trigger, let your eye fall to look at the green grass close by for a second, then resight and fire as your target becomes clear. This is an aiming skill that I was taught years ago by a Russian soldier from their sniper school who was visiting UK, and I have applied it to tracking. List of abbreviations. Normally the list of abbreviations would be placed at the back of a book, but in the case of human tracking, it is essential that the reader understands some of the terminology relevant to tracking in order to comprehend the techniques used. For example, would the reader normally know what spore or top sign meant without a simple explanation? The brief description below will aid the reader in comprehending all the facets that lead up to the interpretation of a tracking picture. At this level of ability, the tracker will be able to identify his quarry with great accuracy and follow them at a speed where they can catch up. This is the same for both human and animal tracking. While some books describe the same aspects of visual tracking, others will vary slightly. The important thing is to recognize the sign for what it is. Quarry: the person, animal, or vehicle being tracked. Tracking: this is defined as the skill of being able to identify a specific person, animal, or vehicle by the signs they have left behind. It is also about making an intelligent interpretation of the sign to enable a prediction and history of the quarry. Sign is any physical indication made by the quarry during their passage. This can include visual sightings, sound indications, or smell. The sap from a bruised root, disturbance of wildlife and birds, lack of dew on the early morning leaves, all this can be evidence of passage. Sign is divided into various parts. Ground sign: a clear footprint in the wet sand would be classed as ground sign. Bottom sign is generally anything below knee height and would include short grass that had been pushed in one direction. Top sign: anything above knee height, a broken branch where someone has grabbed for support. Direction of travel: the probable overall route taken by the quarry. Assessing the direction is a major factor in any tracking operation. This can be deducted not simply by the direction of the spoor, but also with knowledge of the quarry's habitat or end goal, such as an enemy heartland. Terrain type and accessibility over the terrain, such as natural obstacles, i.e. large rivers, also play a major part in the evaluation of the direction of travel. Conclusive sign. The butt-heel shape of a machine gun found in an old campsite would be a conclusive sign that the quarry was armed. Key sign. Where there are several types of signs along the same track, the tracker must be able to identify something that is key to the quarry they are following. This could be a particular tread pattern or the stride measurement of the quarry. The last person in a multi-human track normally leaves the clearest footprint. Use this as your key sign. Substantiating sign. Anything that can be seen, heard, smelt, or felt, which would substantiate other signs in close proximity. Temporary sign. Any sign that is removed or degraded by the weather and time. The tracker must be able to identify when the sign was made and what time passed to when it was located. Local weather conditions and the ground type will play a large part in this deduction. Time bracket. All sign is made at a certain time, then due to erosion, weather, or other mitigating circumstances, the sign will wear down. Upon locating the sign for the first time, the visual tracker should place a time bracket on the sign from when it was made to its present state. Straight edge. Most humans and vehicles are heavy and therefore apply pressure to the ground with their feet or tires. Under certain conditions, the imprint leaves behind a clear straight edge of the sign. Cast. To look around in a logical pattern from the last known confirmed sign. Diet. Relating to the excrement of either human or animal to ascertain their dietary habit. Entry and exit. A person being tracked has to make a choice of where they enter and where they exit. Under certain conditions, the tracker can visually determine these points. Environmental medium. This happens when the quarry is being tracked through a forest which suddenly stops and turns into a plowed field. Where the visual tracker had been looking for scuff marks on the forest floor, they will now look for footprints in the soil. Environmental. The sun, rain, snow, and wind all help to degrade or change any sign left behind by the quarry. Habitat. The place where the quarry, both humans and animals, normally live. For example, the Iban tribesmen live in the jungles of Borneo. Pace generally refers to the speed at which the quarry is moving, which can be determined by the length of the pace. Permanent sign. A broken tree branch would be a good example. Physique. The size and type of quarry being tracked. Pointers. Something that indicates the quarry may have gone before the tracker. Spoor. Sign left behind by the quarry. Starting and defining. A clear indication of the quarry and what it is. Soldiers who have initiated an ambush, fired ammunition, and then ran into the bush would be a good example. Static tracking. Waiting unnoticed on a known route taken regularly by the quarry in order to establish presence and confirm spoor. Step. The pattern of the quarry made by its movement, i.e. a footprint or animal hoofprint. Track. The route of the tracker following their quarry. Tracking picture. A combination of track sign, spoor, which builds up a picture of what the quarry is, where they are heading, and how many there are in the party, etc. Scent. This is normally referenced to when using dogs to assist in tracking, but it can also apply to humans as smell carries in the wind in some climates. Deception. This is where the quarry is aware of a possible tracker following their spoor and makes every effort to leave behind little or no sign. They also try to falsify signs to mislead the tracker. Track jumping. This is where the tracker has a clear indication of the route and jumps ahead at full speed to gain on the quarry. Character. Most human quarry leave behind some form of individual trait that identifies their character. For example, soldiers often wear a typical type of footwear. The quarry may have worn tread on their boot pattern, or a stone may become lodged in the tread. Tuning into the quarry. From the first key sign and any other sign the visual tracker might deduce from their findings will help them tune in to the quarry and assist the visual tracker by helping them predict what actions the quarry may take. How and where to look. Search the ground about 3 to 4 meters in front of you. Move your head slowly, side to side, while concentrating on what you see. Look right through any vegetation to the ground. Tracking sign is not always easy to see, even when it is obvious, and sometimes you'll see lots of sign and then suddenly nothing for several meters. As previously mentioned, humans will take the easy route and, unless trying some form of deception, will stick to the overall direction of travel. Always check for signs at the most likely places where signs may be made. The edge of a clearing, where you either enter or leave an area of vegetation for an open area,